Have you ever wondered why professional mixes feel so alive? It's not just EQ, it's not just compression, and it's definitely not because they're using expensive plugins. One of the biggest differences between an amateur mix and a professional mix is automation. Professional mixes are constantly moving. Vocals are being ridden, guitars are changing level, effects are coming and going. Different instruments are being pushed forward or tucked back depending on what's happening in the song. The funny thing is, a lot of these moves are so subtle that you don't actually hear them. You just feel that the mix stays exciting from beginning to end. Today, I'm going to show you exactly what I mean using a real session from the band Summergrave. We'll go through the automation I use across this mix, from simple volume rides that keep every section balanced to more obvious effect automation using distortion, EQ, delays, and reverbs to create impact throughout the song. By the end of this video, I think you'll start looking at automation less as an afterthought and more as one of the most powerful mixing tools you have. Let's dive in. So to start things off, let's look at what's probably the most subtle, but definitely the most important automation moves you can make, and that is volume automation. Nothing else will have more of an impact on taking a mix from sounding good to professional than doing proper volume automation. It's the type of thing you're not necessarily going to hear, but when you don't do it, the song will just sound flat, lifeless, and lack dynamics. So let's go through instrument by instrument exactly how I'm using volume automation in this mix. Now, one thing to note, often I will do volume automation on the entire mix itself, so the mix that's feeding into my mastering chain. But you can see on this mix, I'm doing absolutely no volume automation on the entire mix because I handled all the moves and dynamics that I needed within the mix itself. So I felt it wasn't necessary to do that additional volume automation section by section on the mix itself. So looking at the drums here, there's a section of the song where it gets a bit more quiet, a bit more open, and I use that opportunity to bring up the volume of the reverb on the drums as well as raise the volume of the room mics, just kind of giving it a more ambient sound. So let's check out the end of the section before that leading into it so you could hear how the drums change. You could hear when that section comes in, how by raising the volume of the reverb and the room mics gives them a little bit more ambience, makes them sound bigger, and really fills the space of that section. For this song, the bass kind of follows the guitars mostly, so there wasn't really any sections where I felt like I needed to make the bass stand out at all. So let's move on to the guitars. The main rhythms stay pretty much static throughout the song, except for one section here, which is where there is a guitar solo. So often what I'll do is I'll drop the volume of the rhythm guitars by about a dB whenever a solo comes in, just to give a little bit more headroom for the lead guitar to kind of cut through. So let me take that automation move off and play this section where you could hear the solo, and then I'll put the automation back on so you could hear how when the volume dips on the guitars in that section, the lead cuts through just a bit more. Let's hear it with the automation on. So that's a subtle one, but it does make a difference, allows the lead to cut through a bit more. And speaking of the lead guitar, which you could see right here, I have a bunch of small volume automation moves, basically just areas where the lead guitar was still getting a little bit buried. I just boosted them by about 0.6 dB in those sections. And then at the end here, when it goes into the chorus, I drop it by 5 dB because that last held lead note was kind of stepping on top of the vocals and everything else. Let's check it out with the automation off, and then I'll show it to you with the automation back on. And specifically pay attention to this area here and this area here. So yeah, looking at this section here with it off, and then with it on, and then with this ending note here with the automation off. And with it on. Volume automation, subtle stuff, but it's making sure that when the lead guitar needs to be front and center, it is, and when it needs to take a step back, it does so. Taking a look at the vocals, you can see the main vocal here. I'm kind of riding the volume of it section by section, just making sure that as the arrangement gets more dense, that the vocals don't get lost. And I'll show you a perfect example of it here. So here we're going to have the verse going into the chorus. If I remove all the automation there, you'll hear that when the chorus comes in and it gets more dense because there's a lead guitar layer, that the vocals will almost kind of get pushed into the background, and we don't want that. So again, focus right here from the verse into the chorus and listen to what it sounds like without any volume automation. You kind of hear when it comes in here, those vocals kind of get lost a little bit. Check it out now with the volume automation on. Even as the arrangement gets more dense, the vocals always stay on top. And that's key because the vocals are king. Let's check out kind of everything else that you would do with automation. And this is looking at like effects, delays, reverbs. These are the things that are not subtle that you could definitely hear, but really help contribute to the dynamics and flow of the song. So it's not just sounding like one static sound throughout. Really helps inject life. So going back to that section where I showed you we automated the volume up on the drum reverb and drum room mics, I wanted this section to sound a bit more distant and small. And the way I achieved that was on the entire mix itself, I'm automating on a low pass filter at 10K. So by cutting out all the high end just in this section, it's going to push that section more in the background and make it feel smaller in comparison to the sections before and after it. So I'm going to just show you that transition from the end of that section into the next one. And first I'll have it with the automation on so you could hear pretty much that transition and how it opens up really when it transitions from having that effect on to having it off. And then I'll show it to you without that automation at all, so you can really hear the difference there. First with it on. Versus having that off. So with it off, there's less of a contrast between that smaller section and that bigger section, and it makes that next section lose its impact. Now looking specifically at the drums, I've discussed this in a previous video, maybe multiple videos honestly. I like to automate on a really aggressive sounding parallel compression on only areas that need impact. So usually choruses, breakdowns, things like that. And I'll show you what that sounds like by itself. So really aggressive sounding. And this works really well when you combine it with the main drums on the sections you want to pop. So in this case, we'll take it from a chorus, and I'll just, as it's playing, go from leaving it on to turning it off, so you could hear that impact it adds to the drums and really the whole section. So it doesn't sound bad with it off, but there's definitely something missing. There's an energy missing to the whole chorus when you don't have that on. So I love sprinkling this in throughout the song wherever I feel like the song as a whole needs a little bit more energy, a little more pop. Moving on to the guitars, I actually start the song with a low pass filtering effect. I'll show you what that looks like. So it's starting off with it filtering at about 200 hertz, and then it'll slowly ramp up till it has the full frequency spectrum when the whole song comes in. So let's check that out with it on, and then I'll show you how different it sounds with it off. If I take that effect off, listen to how flat and boring the intro to the song sounds. That effect is key to not only keeping that intro interesting, but allowing when the whole song comes in to let it really pop and stand out. With vocals, going again back to that section where I wanted everything to kind of sound small, I also wanted there to be an effect on the vocals there to make them stand out and sound different from how they sound on the rest of the song. And what I did was I automated a distortion, and what I'm using is Isotope Ozone, and I think I just used their preset for guitar amp or something like that, and then just took the volume to where it fit. And let me show you what that sounds like with it on, and then I'll kind of turn it off as it goes, and you could hear the difference in what it's adding to the section. Yeah, by doing something like that, it just helps give that one particular section its own sound and own character. The other thing I have going on here is automating on delays and reverbs. And you can see I kind of turn that on throughout the song. And I'll just isolate the vocals, and you'll see how I just have vocal delays on certain key phrases, just to help make them pop and stand out. But the sands of time will flow regardless of my panic. I am not myself. I also do that. There's a section here where we have a bit of choir vocals with a piano. And the first half of it, when the song is a little bit more open, I have a delay and reverb going on there because we have room in the mix to allow it to fill it out. And you'll see I automate it off on the next section where it has to be a bit more staccato so the vocals don't get all masked and blurry from all that delay that we have going on. I'll play it in isolation, and then I'll show it to you in context, and you'll see why I made that decision here. The upset light, its final fight. The strength of the storm can be unpredictable, but the devastation is always the same broken road. Let's check that out in context so you can see why I made that decision over here to turn off the delay. Hopefully this gave you a different perspective on automation. When most people think about mixing, they spend almost all their time chasing perfect EQ settings, compressor settings, or a plug-in chain. Those things absolutely matter. But once you have a solid static mix, automation is what transforms it into something that feels alive. Some of the moves we looked at today were obvious, like the delays, the distortion, and the effects throws. But honestly, the automation that probably has the biggest impact is the stuff you barely notice. The tiny volume adjustments that help guide the listener's attention and keep every section feeling balanced and energetic. So the next time you're finishing a mix, don't just print it as soon as the static mix sounds good. Spend some time listening from start to finish and ask yourself, where could this section have a little more energy? Where should this instrument step forward? Where should it get out of the way? Those small decisions add up to a mix that feels intentional from beginning to end. If you found this helpful, let me know in the comments. What's the one thing in your mixes you've never thought about automating? I'd love to hear your ideas, and maybe I'll feature some of them in a future video. Now that you've got a better understanding of how automation can bring a mix to life, check out this video right here, where I show you 4 mixing tricks that make a metal chorus sound huge. You'll see how many of these automation concepts come together to create bigger, more impactful choruses. Just click the link right there. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.